You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, Mark Pomerantz, who is a former special assistant district attorney, released a book this past week where he criticizes Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg for not bringing criminal charges against Trump sooner. Now, I want to get into the merits of that in a moment, but first, what I think is the more interesting question here, which is, do you think that Pomerantz calling out Alvin Bragg for pussyfooting around Trump is going to light a fire under Bragg's ass to basically go at Trump harder to kind of compensate for his inaction?
You know, Brian, I can tell you that I suspect Alvin Bragg will offer the party line. And the party line for prosecutors is almost always, we will not be impacted by outside pressure from anybody regarding our prosecutorial decisions. But here's the thing. Alvin Bragg is an elected official, right? So he is beholden to the electorate. The voters of New York, I think, are expecting some action. So I think the reality is, when your own senior prosecutor, somebody who frankly has a whole lot more experience going after organized crime than Bragg does, and that's Pomerantz, when he criticizes you for failing to bring a case that was supported by the evidence, I have a feeling that will impact Alvin Bragg, and it wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden we saw the investigative pace accelerating and we saw some concrete evidence that Bragg was moving toward indicting Donald Trump.
Okay, so with that said, that part aside, can you speak on both Pomerantz's criticism of Alvin Bragg here and also Alvin Bragg's rationale for not taking action sooner?
Yeah, so Mark Pomerantz, longtime federal prosecutor, he actually did 2 stints at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. That's an organization that is part of the Department of Justice. He prosecuted mobsters like John Gotti, the head of the Gambino crime family. He was a really experienced organized crime and white-collar prosecutor, and he also went out into private practice and he defended some folks who were involved in organized crime. So, you know, he has seen things from both sides of the bar, as we put it. And, you know, he was brought in by the former New York District Attorney Cy Vance to do precisely what he did, aggressively investigate Donald Trump to see what kind of crimes he may have committed. And Pomerantz, in his book and frankly in his resignation letter when he quit the district attorney's office in protest because Bragg refused to bring charges against Donald Trump, he announced plainly that they had enough evidence to indict Donald Trump. And in his opinion, and the opinion of his co-counsel in the case, Carrie Dunn, and he said in the opinion of Cy Vance, the former district attorney for Manhattan, they all believed they had the goods on Donald Trump and they should indict him. And then Bragg came in and he killed the investigation. Now, what little Bragg has said about it, he hasn't said much, which is appropriate. You know, prosecutors usually don't talk about pending investigations, but he said, you know, I just didn't think the evidence was quite there, and I thought there should be more investigation going into it. And, you know, to me, based on everything that I've seen publicly reported, that feels like an overly cautious and unduly timid way to approach the, you know, many crimes of Donald Trump. So, you know, and I think it's important to note that Pomerantz criticizes Bragg's decision pretty vigorously, but he never accuses Bragg of being compromised or, you know, making the decision for the wrong, improper, unethical reasons, just that, you know, he was a little bit too timid when it came to being the first prosecutor to charge a former president.
We've spoken about this before, but is this kind of a common thing in that world where if you have like a high-level target like Donald Trump, although, you know, obviously there's no precedent for Donald Trump, but a high-level target that nobody wants to be the first, and so if you have all of these other investigations and potential indictments swirling around, everyone's kind of waiting for the first one to drop, and then there's going to be a waterfall effect after that?
Yeah, I have a feeling a lot of prosecutors are paying attention to what other prosecutors are doing when it comes to investigating the crimes of Donald Trump. I've said many times, you and I have discussed this, I don't think any prosecutor wants to be the first one to indict a former president, but I have a feeling once that barrier is broken, once one brave, determined prosecutor charges Donald Trump for just some of his crimes, the dam will break, and other prosecutors will all of a sudden want to be in the business of prosecuting Donald Trump for the crimes that he committed in their jurisdiction, whether it's Georgia or New York or federally or elsewhere.
Yeah, well, looking at you, Fani Willis, I think she's going to be the first one. Okay, I want to go back to Bragg for a moment. Now, he's complained publicly that the release of Pomerantz's book could interfere with ongoing investigations. Now, first of all, it's been how many years that Alvin Bragg has done nothing for him to suddenly complain about his toes getting stepped on? So that's just something I needed to say. But my commentary aside, do you think that this complaint by Alvin Bragg is valid or justified?
You know what? I will echo your commentary, Brian. Not only did Bragg have plenty of time to make this decision, not only did his team of senior prosecutors who knew the Trump criminal investigation inside out reach the conclusion that they have the goods and they ought to indict Donald Trump. And not only did the former New York District Attorney Cy Vance reach that same conclusion, according to Pomerantz. Now, it's curious that Cy Vance didn't have Pomerantz pull the trigger and indict Donald Trump, but the reason for that, according to Pomerantz, is they still needed to do a little bit more work, and because Bragg was a big talker when he was running for office about how he was going to hold Donald Trump accountable, Cy Vance thought, okay, the new DA is going to come in and he's going to pick up things where I left them off, and they will pretty quickly, move toward indicting Donald Trump. But when you think of those three pretty experienced, consequential figures, Pomerantz, his trial partner Carrie Dunn, and the former New York District Attorney Cy Vance, all concluding that they had the goods on Donald Trump, when you read some of the comments by Alvin Bragg, who has said some things to try to meet the force of Pomerantz's criticism, he says things like, many people are saying we didn't have enough evidence. And I'm sorry, but that sort of lands to me like something Donald Trump would say. Many people are saying it isn't a witch hunt. So frankly, I think Pomerantz and company have the better argument here. And here's the one thing that has probably troubled me most since I saw Pomerantz say this when he was being interviewed by Rachel Maddow. He said, if Alvin Bragg chooses only to proceed against Donald Trump on these hush money payments that Trump made to Stormy Daniels, the $130,000 payoff to keep her mouth shut and hide damaging information from the election, from the voters back during the 2016 election, if that's the only crime Bragg chooses to pursue, it will, quote, be a very peculiar and unsatisfying end to this whole saga, close quote. Reading between the lines, it will be a miscarriage of justice.
Okay, let's finish off with this. Bragg had said in response to a question from ABC News, quote, "I bring hard cases when they're ready. Mark Pomerantz's case was not ready." How much time has passed between the end of Mark Pomerantz's involvement and the beginning of this whole saga where this book has been released? And do you buy that whole argument that all of this new information came out in that amount of time that wasn't available in the years that Alvin Bragg and had taken over this case and continued the work of Cy Vance?
No, this is like cleanup on aisle Bragg, right, is what we're engaged in now, because Mark Pomerantz was sworn in as a special assistant district attorney to take on the Trump investigation, I believe February 2nd of 2021. He investigated, he had the goods, they were drafting indictments, and then Alvin Bragg killed the investigation, and I think Pomerantz resigned in protest around February of 2022. Where are we now? February of 2023. Yeah, I think it's time for Bragg to put up or shut up, and it looks like he has not really come to a place where he's willing to put up.
Yeah, and what's going to be especially telling here is if we don't get some type of charges from Alvin Bragg, it'll kind of undermine everything he's saying now, because he's saying, oh, well, I spent this whole time between when Mark Pomerantz resigned and when I finally brought these charges, building up this case, and based on what I just said, with his comment here, building up this case. And so if nothing comes out of that, then that'll kind of show that he was just full of shit from the beginning. But I guess time will tell in terms of what we actually see from the Manhattan DA. So you and I will follow this news. For anybody watching, if you want to keep up with this stuff, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.